What if the monster next door wasn't a monster at all? What if he was just a quiet, lonely old man? This story doesn't begin with a police report or a flashing siren. It begins, as so many modern horrors do, with a post. It appeared on the subreddit Let's Not Meet, written by a user named MapleWatcher. The title was chilling in its simplicity. My elderly neighbor is the kindest man I've ever met, and I think he's a killer. The post painted a picture of a perfect suburban street, a place where bad things were only stories you heard about on the news. For 3 years, MapleWatcher had lived a life defined by the peaceful hum of lawnmowers and the scent of freshly cut grass. The focus of this idyllic picture, and the growing dread, was Mr. Abernathy. Every morning from their kitchen window, MapleWatchers saw him, a stooped, elderly figure tending to his prize-winning roses as the sun glinted off his silver hair. He always offered a warm, crinkle-eyed smile and a gentle wave. But the smile never quite reached his eyes. There was a vacancy there, a chilling emptiness that made the gesture feel hollow. Something was wrong. It started with small, unsettling details. A strange smell from his garbage cans on collection day. A sharp chemical scent of bleach mixed with something faintly metallic. Then came the digging. MapleWatcher would wake at 3 in the morning to see the silhouette of Mr. Abernathy in his garden, spade in hand, turning over the earth beneath the moon. It was easy to rationalize. Insomnia, perhaps, a peculiar nocturnal hobby. But the feeling persisted, a cold knot tightening in their stomach. How do you report a fear based on nothing more than an odd gardening schedule and a faint chemical odor? It was a seed of doubt, planted in the most unlikely of soils. This is the new reality of suspicion. When a fear feels too irrational for the real world, we turn to anonymous forums.
These digital spaces become our first confessionals, places to voice the terrors that have yet to take solid shape. For MapleWatcher, the Reddit post was an exorcism, a way to release a fear they couldn't even bring themselves to voice to their own spouse. The doubt festered, growing in the dark, until one specific observation made it impossible to ignore, transforming a vague unease into a terrifying certainty. The post ended with a plea for advice, detailing the one thing that had finally pushed them to write. It was about the birds. Or rather, the sudden, complete, and unnatural silence where their songs used to be. Soon, MapleWatcher would discover what was buried beneath Mr. Abernathy's perfect roses. The man behind the post was named Arthur Abernathy, but he was little more than a ghost in broad daylight. For years, he was just a shape in the window, a flash of gray hair seen only at dawn or dusk. Groceries were delivered to his doorstep. Mail would pile up for days before vanishing in the night. MapleWatcher recalled the first time they truly saw him up close. It was a crisp autumn morning, viewed through the kitchen window. Mr. Abernathy was on his knees, not tending to his flowers, but meticulously polishing the bright red cap of a small ceramic garden gnome. He used a soft cloth, his movements as delicate and precise as a watchmaker's. This was his ritual. This, it seemed, was his entire shrunken world. His yard was less a garden and more a silent, unsettling congregation. Over 50 of them stood guard in perfect geometric rows. There were gnomes with tiny fishing rods, gnomes pushing miniature wheelbarrows, gnomes with vacant, painted-on smiles that, like their owners, never reached their eyes. Their glossy, black stares seemed to follow you as you passed by on the sidewalk. They were his stone sentinels, an army frozen in a state of perpetual, unnerving cheer. Some were chipped, their jolly faces marred by thin cracks that looked like grim scars in the morning light. They were silent watchers. The only sound was the faint, tinny chime he'd hung from a lone birch tree, a melody that felt less like a welcome and more like a warning. Interactions were rare and always unnervingly brief. MapleWatcher once tried a friendly wave while getting the mail on a sweltering July afternoon. Mr. Abernathy, dressed in immaculate gardening coveralls despite the heat, was watering a patch of unnervingly perfect grass. He stopped, gave a curt, jerky nod, and immediately turned his back. His eyes never met Maple Watcher's. Instead, they darted back to his porcelain flock, as if to ensure they were safe from the intrusion. He wasn't hostile, just sealed, hermetically sealed inside his own quiet reality. How do you gauge the true nature of a man whose only friends are made of ceramic? It was easy, too easy, to dismiss him as a harmless eccentric. Over time, the deep strangeness faded into background noise. The rows of smiling gnomes became just another neighborhood quirk, like the house with the peeling paint or the dog that always barked at nothing. We have a remarkable capacity to normalize the bizarre, to file away the unsettling until it becomes invisible. This instinct, this need to look away from what makes us uncomfortable, is a vulnerability. It can blind us to danger hiding in plain sight. Those silent watchers became part of the scenery. But the truth is, those gnomes weren't just decorations standing on a perfectly manicured lawn. They were markers. They were guarding a terrible secret buried just inches beneath the surface. A secret that was about to be unearthed. It was the late October storm that finally broke the silence. For the first time in 3 years, Arthur Abernathy knocked on my door, his knuckles rapping a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm.
The stony mask I knew from his fleeting appearances had completely dissolved, replaced by raw panic. His basement was flooding from the torrential downpour, he explained. He needed help moving old furniture to higher ground. It was the most he had ever said to me at once. A simple, neighborly favor. How could I refuse? Downstairs, the air was thick and cold, a suffocating mix of mildew and damp earth. Water dripped steadily from the exposed ceiling joists onto the dark concrete floor, each drop a tiny, echoing metronome counting down to some unseen revelation. Mr. Abernathy, looking smaller and frailer under a single bare bulb, pointed a trembling hand at a heavy oak bookshelf. As we strained together to drag its waterlogged base, my boot hit something solid tucked behind it. In the darkest corner sat a large, water-damaged cedar chest, bound with thick, rusted iron straps. He saw me looking. "Just junk," he muttered quickly, waving a dismissive hand without making eye contact. "Forget you even saw it. Just junk." The words hung in the damp air, feeling heavier than the chest itself. How could a man so meticulous about his stone sentinels simply forget something so substantial? This wasn't misplaced clutter. It felt deliberately hidden, a secret anchored to the very foundation of his quiet, lonely house. These are the moments that fuel the dark corners of the internet, the unsettling discoveries born from simple acts of kindness, reminding us that the deepest chasms can exist just one wall away. The online persona of Maple Watcher was about to collide with a terrifying reality. That chest was a Pandora's box, and I had just watched the man next door desperately try to slam the lid shut on whatever horrors lay inside. That forgotten chest sat on the curb for days, a silent, dark accusation under the streetlight. The storm had passed, but another was brewing inside me. I told myself it was just old junk, the final remnants of Arthur Abernathy's reclusive life. But the weight of that favor, the frantic look in his eyes, it wouldn't let me rest. A quiet man. Under the cover of a moonless sky, I took a crowbar from my garage. The cold metal bit into my palm as I worked the rusty lock. The sharp crack of it breaking echoed like a gunshot in the dead quiet of the cul-de-sac. My breath hitched. The heavy lid creaked open, releasing a smell of damp earth and mothballs. It wasn't old clothes or books. It was a nest of horrors. Dozens of tarnished silver lockets and cheap plastic bracelets, none of them matching. A single child's sneaker, its laces still tied, caked in dried mud. And beneath it all, a bundle of photographs bound with twine. Faded, square-edged pictures from the 1980s and 1990s. children I had never seen, smiling at birthday parties, posing on school picture day. None of them were his. How could a collection of lost things, of stolen childhoods, feel so utterly menacing? This is the terror that lurks in plain sight, the reason these stories grip us so tightly. We see the closed doors and wonder what secrets they keep. The truth is never as simple as a neatly kept lawn. Now, holding this impossible proof in my trembling hands, a single terrifying question began to take shape. A question that would change everything. What happens when you feed a dark secret to the internet? With trembling hands, I uploaded the photos of Arthur Abernathy's horrors to a true crime subreddit. The title was blunt. My neighbor passed away. I found this in a chest he threw out. At first, just a trickle of comments. Then, the dam broke. My phone buzzed incessantly, a frantic digital rhythm that echoed his knock on my door during that storm. The hive mind had awakened. A user from halfway across the world posted a grainy newspaper clipping from 1987. It showed a smiling young woman wearing a heart-shaped silver locket, identical to the tarnished one I held in my hand.
The caption read, "Have you seen Melissa Carter?" Suddenly, the abyss from that chest had a name. The thread exploded into a frenzy. It was no longer my story. It became a global investigation room, a digital precinct working around the clock. Users enhanced the blurry photos of the other trinkets. They cross-referenced databases of missing persons I didn't even know existed. How could so many strangers, separated by oceans and time zones, care so deeply about ghosts they'd never met? Another user identified a tattered bus ticket from a small town in Oregon, connecting it to a disappearance from 2002. Then a faded library card from Arizona from 1994. The quiet old man with his stone sentinels, Mr. Abernathy, was not a ghost in one town. He was a phantom who had drifted across the country for decades, collecting terrible souvenirs. This is the power and the peril of the modern age, where cold cases are thawed by the collective heat of online curiosity. The lines between helpful sleuthing and digital vigilantism blur, but sometimes they uncover a truth that authorities missed for years. The web of connections grew more tangled, more horrifying with each passing hour. The screen in my dark living room was the only light, a portal to a nightmare spanning more than 20 years. But one item remained a complete mystery, a small, hand-carved wooden bird that seemed to hold a significance all its own. How does a familiar place become a house of horrors overnight? My laptop screen was a portal to hell, and Arthur Abernathy was the main attraction. The Reddit thread was a living entity now, a chaotic storm of amateur sleuthing with a life of its own. Users had definitively identified the silver locket. It belonged to a young woman who vanished from a town 200 miles away 23 years ago. Her grainy missing person poster was now juxtaposed with a crystal-clear photo of Abernathy's grinning gnomes. My quiet cul-de-sac was suddenly the unwilling epicenter of a decades-old mystery. The digital noise was deafening, but it was the profound silence from his house that truly terrified me. A silence that felt heavy, watchful, and deeply wrong. The paranoia was a physical thing, a cold weight in my stomach. Last night, I was making tea around 2 in the morning when I heard it, a faint scraping sound from his yard, like stone on soil. I crept to the window, my breath fogging the cold glass, and saw that one of the stone sentinels had been moved. Its painted face was now turned directly toward my kitchen. It was impossible, of course, a trick of the mind, a product of sleeplessness and fear. Yet the terror was sickeningly real. How many nights had I slept soundly, separated by just a few yards of manicured lawn and thin drywall from a man who collected souvenirs of unspeakable acts? The online world can feel distant, but this truth was a poison seeping through the very foundations of my own home. It's a chilling reminder that we never truly know the people we share a fence with. The hive mind was relentless. They were building a case, faster and with more passion than any official investigation could muster. Timelines were drawn up, connecting Abernathy's known business trips with a terrifying string of disappearances across 3 states. The police had been notified by dozens of Redditors, but the wheels of justice grind infuriatingly slow. I felt trapped in a terrifying limbo, watching a horror movie unfold where I was the only one in the theater. My Maple Watcher username was my shield, but it felt flimsy against the growing dread. Then, as I refreshed the page for the 100th time, a new private message blinked in my inbox. It was from a user I didn't recognize, their profile completely empty. The message was short, but it made the air in my lungs turn to ice. It read, "He didn't work alone. And they know you found the chest." How do you report a monster when you're terrified you aren't alone? The Reddit thread gave me courage, but my hands still trembled as I dialed 911. I sat on my kitchen floor in the dark, phone pressed to my ear, my voice a strained, artificial whisper. I gave the address, mentioned the chest from the storm, and described the photos without naming myself. The dispatcher's voice was a calm river in my ocean of panic. She simply said, "We'll send a unit to do a welfare check." Then she hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. Every creak of my house sounded like a footstep. I was a ghost in my own home, peering through the blinds at that dark house next door. In an age where every digital footprint is permanent, could a single phone call truly remain untraced? I had crossed a line from passive observer to active participant, and there was no going back. The longest night of my life. This fear of being exposed is a burden every anonymous tipster carries, a silent tax on doing the right thing. The minutes stretched into an hour, then 2, each one a small eternity of absolute dread. Then, through a crack in the curtains, I saw it. The first silent, pulsing flash of blue and red light painting my street. What sound does your world make when it shatters? Mine was the quiet crunch of tires on gravel. At 5 in the morning, 2 unmarked sedans and a forensics van rolled into the cul-de-sac, their lights painting silent, screaming strokes across my bedroom walls. No sirens, just a methodical, chilling arrival. They weren't raiding a house, they were dissecting a tomb. I watched from my window as the officers moved with a terrifying, practiced calm. They didn't kick down the door. A key turned in the lock, a quiet click, and they were inside, swallowed by the shadows of Abernathy's home. For nearly 2 hours, the only movement was the flicker of flashlight beams dancing across his grimy windows. The silence was absolute. Then they brought him out. Arthur Abernathy, blinking in the new dawn, looked smaller than I'd ever imagined. He was just a frail old man in a threadbare cardigan, his hands cuffed behind his back. There was no struggle, no shouting. He just looked lost. How could this be the architect of the horrors in that chest? My mind recoiled from the reality of it. Later that day, a detective with tired eyes confirmed everything. The Reddit thread had been right. The items from the chest perfectly matched evidence from a string of cold cases that had haunted the state for decades. They had a name for the killer, a boogeyman whispered about since the late 1970s. They called him the Garden Ghost, my quiet neighbor, the man who collected stone gnomes. The detective's voice was flat as he laid out the facts. Arthur Abernathy was officially linked to at least 6 child abductions between 1979 and 2001. A lifetime of monstrous evil, followed by 2 decades of silent retirement right next to me. This case is a stark reminder that true evil often wears the most unassuming mask, and sometimes it takes a digital hive mind to finally pull it off. The man who tended his stone sentinels had stolen children from their own backyards. The detective thanked me for the anonymous call that finally put a face to the ghost. But as he was leaving, he paused. He said the chest wasn't the only thing they'd found. The police tape came down, but the silence it left behind was louder than any siren. Maple Court was broken. We, the residents, just didn't know how to admit it yet. A few days later, I saw Mrs. Gable from number 12 standing on her lawn, just staring at Arthur Abernathy's house.
She wasn't watering her petunias or getting the mail. She was just frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. Our eyes met for a brief second across the manicured grass, a shared, silent acknowledgement of the nightmare we'd slept beside for years.
That's the real horror. It isn't the discovery itself, but the poison that seeps into everything afterward. Every closed blind, every unanswered doorbell now felt sinister. The garden ghost was gone, but his shadow stretched over all of us. My final post on Reddit was less of an update and more of a confession. I thanked the hive mind, the strangers who saw the truth in those horrifying photos when I couldn't face it alone. I wrote about the shattering of our suburban illusion, the terrifying knowledge that normalcy is the thinnest of veils. This story matters because it reminds us that evil doesn't always announce itself with a bang. Sometimes it arrives with a polite nod and a perfectly kept lawn. The real monsters are the ones we never suspect. The thread is locked now, an archived piece of internet history. But for me, for us on Maple Court, the story isn't over. The house was eventually sold. New people moved in. But the quiet cul-de-sac I knew from before that October storm is gone forever, replaced by something colder. And I still watch the windows across the street, wondering what dark secrets they hold.